Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, it's time for Financial Literacy Update. We'll get to that in a moment, but first we have an all-star panel of Capitol journalists. We're going to get into the big subjects of the week. We'll do that and maybe a few other things, but we'll do them all after
This
words.
is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, as we get close to the end of the month, June 30 would be the deadline. The state is supposed to pass a budget. We have other breaking news going on. We have cabinet confirmations, a little problem for Governor Wolf with a few of his appointees. We have something called internet gaming. Joining me to talk about some of these, sitting on my right, that's just has nothing to do with ideology. It's Karen Langley with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock newspapers, and John Micek. He's, of course, the editorial page editor of Patriot News PennLive. John, I want to start with you.
Sure.
Does anyone have a clue where this budget is going? What happened last week? We did have some activities, right?
It's heading someplace into August, if we're going to be conservative
right.
About this. I mean, last week there was some parliamentary gymnastics on the House floor as Democrats pushed for a vote on Governor Tom Wolf's budget plan. Republicans kind of topspin lobbed that back at them and said, well, if you're going to vote on a spending plan, you have to vote on a tax plan. And Democrats said, wait, that's a political stunt. You're forcing us to vote for tax increases. So they voted against Governor Wolf's Tom Wolf's tax plan, which they actually support, handing Republicans kind of a gratuitous win, because they can now say Democrats think Tom Wolf's tax plan is so bad, even they won't vote for it.
Yeah. Now, but I hear, the House Majority Leader, Dave Reed from Indiana County, issues a statement. I guess he talked to you all in the press and said, oh, we're meeting with the governor and everything is, you get all of these mixed messages, or am I wrong about that?
That's right. I think that as negotiations are continuing or heating up in the first place, we're also still having both sides wanting to publicly put out their positions, because, these are negotiations that are starting from very separate points. And I think more so than in recent years, people are not necessarily ruling out compromising, because I think there's a lot of agreement that some compromise will be necessary to come up with a budget in the next month or months, as the case may be.
All right, Robert, look, the fundamental problem seems to this observer is Governor Wolf has a budget. There are a variety of, the big thing would be the Marcellus Shale tax for education spending. Republicans don't seem enamored with it, to put it mildly. On the other hand, you have the majority leader in the Senate saying, if you don't do pension reform, we're not going to do revenues. Is this all negotiations? Obviously it's that. Or is the linchpin to get a budget, do you think, pension reform of the two big state pension systems?
I have thought that the linchpin to getting a budget deal was this idea of, reducing property taxes by a huge amount, hiking two forms of state taxes, sales and income. And so when the House, by a bipartisan vote last month, voted for that, and Wolf's on board with it, I thought, well, gee, there's your pathway. Difficult,
right?
But then you start adding these issues like pensions, liquor. And then this week, if gambling is starting to bubble up again, and that just these add-ons are difficult, complicated issues, and push it beyond June 30th.
Yeah. So the bottom line here, John, it seems to me, is simple. Governor Wolf has a property tax reform bill that's not all that, not hugely different from one passed by the House, but the Senate Republicans haven't indicated they're going to take it up. Is also the problem that the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans don't seem to be on the same page.
Yeah,
is that way out?
No, that's sort of like the perennial problem. Yeah. There's always been this sort of distance between the two clans in the chamber. The Republicans are lukewarm on the idea of the sales tax increase and the PIT increase it'll take to drive out property tax reform. They've shown no inclination toward taking up the bill that the House sent over. On the other hand, there's a whole bunch of stuff that the Senate wants that the House has, medical marijuana, for instance. Yep. They're going to have to do pensions. So somewhere in the midst of that, they're all going to have to meet.
All right, we're going to run. We'll get back to Karen. We're going to run to a quick break, then we're going to continue this discussion. I also want to get into internet gambling. We have casinos in the state. We have a variety of ways to spend spend your money. Let me say that. We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, thanks for joining me. We're having a all-star journalist panel: John Micek, Robert Swift, and Karen Langley. Karen, you wanted to make a point. Property tax on the table.
One thing that I would just point out about that package of property tax reform, which would rely on raising the tax rates for the sales and personal income taxes, is that while for Governor Wolf, this is part of his budget plan, so he would want to be able to use some of that money for other budget priorities and so tie it into the budget. For the Republicans, they are saying that they want all of those increased revenues to go strictly towards property tax reform, and so for them, they're arguing this doesn't necessarily have to be part of the budget package and that it could be resolved at a later date. So I think that we will have to see some illumination on that issue during the budget time, but it may turn out not to be part of the budget package.
Yeah, and it's not, Robert, it's not, as Karen points out, it's not essential. They can do the budget without doing the property tax piece, which is separate from that completely, except for the revenues that...
I mean, some of the sales tax revenue in Wolf's plan goes for pension reduction. Right. So, I mean, there are some...
So they are connected in that way.
I'm just looking for some idea where they start to agree on anything. Yeah. Okay, so...
Pensions for the budget?
Well, I'm looking at when you have a governor, one chamber on the same page, I'm looking for where's a path.
Yeah.
And that's the only one where I see anything, 2 of 3 agreeing.
Pensions?
Yeah. And you need a governor. You need a governor on this to move this stuff.
You agree?
I think so.
Governor? But if the governor agrees to pension reform, doesn't that anger the Democratic base in the unions?
We see no sign that he would agree to that.
No sign that he would. Everybody agrees with
that? Not to the bill that has passed the Senate.
Not to the bill. No. He has his own ideas about it, right? We'll do bonds to help pay off the debt.
There's conceptual agreement that something has to be done about pensions. It's the Senate bill that's the issue.
All right. Well, we're going to
concept.
Yeah, we're going to revisit this on and on and on, as you pointed out, John. We could be in August. All right. Do we need another form of gambling in the state?
Yeah, sure.
Gaming. Go ahead. Talk about it.
Why not? Our circulation director, actually, we were having a great conversation about this bill that John Payne from over in Hershey wants to do to legalize internet gaming. He was sitting at his breakfast table one Sunday morning, hopped online, went to like Cameroon or Sri Lanka or some site someplace, entered his credit card number. 5 minutes later, he was playing blackjack on the internet. You know, and this is legal. Sports betting, I think, is legal. You can go to London and place a bet on a soccer match in the high street. So I think they're saying this is uncaptured revenue. It's not being taxed. It's not being regulated. So grab the whatever million or a couple hundred million you can grab from that, put it in, direct into the general fund. So this is now, as RB said, sort of another component of the budget discussion.
Go ahead.
The Senate bill leadership backing is coming out on this, and I was also struck by in the Senate bill provision that would allow casinos to have limited number of slot machines in, quote, non-primary locations, which could be the remaining off-track betting parlors.
Also, out your way in Pittsburgh, I saw a piece where they can do, we'll put slot machines in airports. Right?
That was something that one state rep out there wants. It seems like gambling is something that tends to come up at a certain point in the budget process.
I wonder what the point is, right? It's all about what? Money?
About revenue.
Yeah. All right. What passage of this, I'm going to ask you, John, more favorable than not internet gaming? I know, I always put you on the spot.
It's a toughie. I mean, they could, as so often is the case, they could come down to the last couple of hours of the budget debate, and they'll need a couple $100 million here or there, and they might end up doing it.
Yes, no?
This is
You've been through this with gaming and...
to get casino gambling took 30 years.
Yeah.
Once again, that's when the governor came on board, Governor Rendell. This one here, this was, last June they were talking about this.
So in other words, they need another 20 years. I think
it's difficult to do it quickly.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We're going to talk about more death penalty. Governor Wolf has a moratorium. Where does all that go? We'll find out in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Welcome back. We're talking about all things that are occurring or not occurring, as the case might be, in the state capitol. John Micek, I think the state has executed, you'll correct me, 3 people in 30 years.
Yes.
Now we have Governor Wolf issued a moratorium a couple of months ago. Now there was an individual scheduled for execution. This is the moratorium, no death penalty, no execution. Where's all that stand?
Well, I mean, Seth Williams, the Philadelphia District Attorney, appealed to the state Supreme Court to use its King's bench power to hear a challenge to Governor Wolf's moratorium. So far, that's not happened. Victims advocates and legislative Republicans have been calling on the governor to rescind his moratorium. But I mean, let's keep in mind, you're absolutely correct. We've had 3 inmates sent to the death chamber in 30 years, all 3 of whom voluntarily waived their appeals. Yeah. This latest one, Hubert Michael, his execution is being delayed. But the state hasn't had one for all of this time because of the length of appeals and a very lengthy process. I mean, what was fascinating was just the other week was in Nebraska, where they have a unicameral chamber. Republicans there actually successfully led an effort to repeal the death penalty statute. There's a veto by the Republican governor, which they then overrode. So there, again, this sort of change in public sentiment, this time spearheaded by Republicans. It's fascinating to watch.
Yeah. So at the moment, it stays in place until the court does something.
Yeah, it seems to underline the governor's argument. This is neither cost-effective nor much of a deterrent.
All right. What did you do this week that's important? Tell us.
Following the state budget process, the beginning of the House discussions on the pension bill, we saw some state troopers and the corrections officers saying, "Hey, leave us out of this. We are in a special category."
And didn't I read a report where the Troopers Association said 1,000 state police could leave? Retire?
They said that there are 1,000 troopers who are eligible for retirement, and they kind of, brought up the possibility that if they were too upset with changes that were made, that they could all leave at once. They said they weren't making a threat, but they brought this up to the lawmakers.
But I remember they used the word mass exodus. Was that the word?
Something like that.
That was a term that was used. All right. Confirmation hearings. The general public doesn't much get into that, but we have a nominee to be police commissioner of the state, right? And there was some difficulty with that and at least one other. What's going to happen with those?
The nomination of Marcus Brown to be state police commissioner will probably go to some sort of Senate vote maybe next week, as early as next week. It's still, it's unclear at this point what will happen. 2 other nominees of the governor's DEP, John Quigley and Pedro Cortez at state, came out of committees with no recommendation at all, which is unusual. Now, that's pretty unusual, yeah. Yet they both, Cortez by a 31-18 vote, Quigley by a 44-4 vote.
Well, doesn't that really mean,
And one thing that struck me is I covered the Quigley hearing, and I was struck by, on this environmental resources panel, the geographic imbalance on the committee. Five of the members are from Western PA areas of coal, gas, and timber.
And that they tend to be more supportive of the industry, is that correct?
Yes, exactly, because they're employers.
Southeastern members in the legislature more, I'll use a word,
more green.
I'll get emails on it, more environmentally. John, you would agree, you've covered this for a long time, right?
And there's no Republicans from the Southeast or the center part of the state on that committee. There's a couple of Democrats, 2 from the Southeast. So I was struck by this important committee, it seems stacked to me.
Yeah. Okay, we're just about out of time. Maybe we'll have to do this another time. Same-day voter registration, that's now percolating. Is there any introduced by a Democrat, right? Any sense that that's likely to happen? Same-day registration is different from registering on the internet, right, John?
Yeah, Lloyd Smucker, the Republican from Lancaster County State Senator, he's pushing online registration.
Online.
Ryan Bizzaro, the fantastically named Democrat from Erie, is pushing the same-day reg bill. I mean, this all bubbles up out of the frankly pathetic turnout out of the primary earlier this month.
19%.
19%. I mean, they're looking for ways to make it more consumer friendly for people to turn out and vote. And one of these things is just turn up the polling place, sign some papers, off you go.
All right. Well, wonderful update. I'm still a little confused about what's going to happen on the budget because I don't think anybody knows. All right. Data breach, credit cards, what are you doing with them? We got some experts who are going to tell you how to protect yourself. And we'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, it's time for our popular financial literacy update. Joining me is Pat Conway. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association, and Sheba Wallish. She's director of card services at the aforementioned Credit Association. You're the right person to have on here today, aren't you, when we talk about data breaches and card services. It's wonderful to have you on. Are there these data breaches, you read about them all the time, do they get down to the level of the consumer, or are they just at some, higher level organization?
They
Tell me about
absolutely
that.
do get at the consumer level, and that's what kind of makes it so scary for the consumers, because they can so easily be affected when they have no idea what's going on. But most recently, for 2014, the most recent stat is that every 12 hours, there was a data breach of some size or magnitude.
Wow. Well, let's talk specifically then. Okay. Pat, the people, because most folks know you have a credit card, you're protected. Does that mean they're not as careful? Are we not as careful as we should? I'll point to myself and leave our viewers out of this. Not as careful because, I'm not, whatever happens, I'm not going to put any money out of my pocket. Or do you put $50 up? I forget how that works.
Yeah, there's really no responsibility or no risk for the consumer. And that's why we try to, remind people that using credit cards and debit cards is very safe. Back in 1980, 15% of all purchases were purchased on a plastic card. Today, it's well over 60%. If you add in mobile payments, it's well over 80%. But credit cards and debit cards are safe. With the consumers limited to $50 in terms of liability. As long as you report it quickly, they're safe. But it is the primary vehicle for data breaches, and that can also lead then to identity theft, which is reaching a crisis these days.
Now, identity theft is very serious.
Yes.
Correct?
Absolutely.
What's going on in the world?
I mean, anytime one of these breaches happen, the consumers are at risk for any piece of their personal information. Most frequently, it's the credit card and debit card numbers that are compromised. But with so many breaches shifting to like the insurance industry, the healthcare industry, that's social security numbers, all your personal information. So it is just putting all of that information at risk.
Yeah. Just last week I was asked, I won't get into the organization, to put my Social Security on, mail it back to them, and I refused to do it. I mean, I've just gotten very leery of what of the request. Now, the last 4 digits, you would know more about this than I do, but people really have to, I mean, that seems to me to be a far more significant problem if you get somebody's Social Security number than a credit card. Am I right or wrong about that? Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, absolutely. If you lose your credit card, information and the Social Security number, personal data, healthcare, the healthcare industry right now is the primary industry, followed by retail, government sources, because they have so much information that cyber thieves know where to find it. And so when they get that information, including your Social Security number, that's a real problem.
That's rightly or wrongly more scary to me. Okay, so I'm watching television, and every 5 minutes it seems there's buy this service to prevent a data breach or to prevent some kind of internet fraud or credit card fraud. Talk about that.
Yeah, there's many services out there, as you mentioned, that can help you protect your identity. None of these services can prevent anything from happening. It's just more a tool that's in place that if something happens, it can help you. Along with credit unions, the association just recently launched Sherpa, Identity Theft Protection and Restoration Service.
Say that again.
Sherpa.
Okay, Sherpa, okay.
Yep, the consumer website is protectedbysherpa.com, but these type of services help you in case something happens. So if your identity is stolen or you have a credit card that's breached, these services can help you one-on-one get back to that pre-compromised state and give you that peace of mind that somebody's watching out for you.
But you have to pay for those, right? You just can't. Now maybe you have some kind of internet, where they may provide it, but are these, in general, would you recommend that people get one of these services, but they'd have to do wouldn't they have to do the appropriate research on them, Pat?
Absolutely, yeah. I definitely recommend it. In fact, I was a part of a breach through a payroll provider from a job that I had many years ago. And what happens generally in those cases is the company will provide the people that were involved in that data breach with 1 year of protection, but then it expires, and the cyber crooks know that, so they're not going to come look until after 12 months.
How about this aspect? I could be wrong about this. My wife handles this, but I think we have a policy, $1 million worth of protection. Are they good or bad, or do you?
Yeah, and even as part of many of these identity protection programs, they include $1 million of insurance. So if something happens, you don't have those out-of-pocket expenses to fix what happened.
So that is how ultimately you would be protected. Is that correct?
As one of the aspects, yes.
One of the aspects. All right, we're almost out of time. I just want to go to one last subject. When we talk about credit cards and the increasing use of them, are we basically saying that that's the way of the future? Aren't we eventually going to not have credit cards at all, but have pins and other things that replace the plastic?
Things are changing rapidly, and I had mentioned earlier that plastic cards account for over 60% of payments.
Yeah, good point.
But the mobile payments in conjunction with the cards.
You'll come back and we'll talk about that. That's something we ought to get into. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.